any further, I would like to bring up Anthony Pops Mitchell to sing, lift every voice and sing, to kick this thing off right for us, all right? So let's do that.
Will everybody stand? Lift every voice, hands heard and heavenly, ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing the song of the faith that the Lord has brought us. Darkness sing full of the hope that the present has brought us. Faith in the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on. Victory is the one.
So, I was born and raised here in Manchester, but one of the things that they did not say was that I was actually the interim executive director of the Manchester Citizens Corporation for a year and a half. That's where I got my start. So let's not forget that. So tonight we're here celebrating 60 years of Manchester's rich history. You know, I love growing up in Manchester. One of the things that I remember the most, and I always remember about Manchester, is that the fire station on North Avenue, they used to turn on their sirens and race down to Rudy's Pizza just to get pizza, right? No fire, no nothing, just to get pizza. And I used to love that, right? So that was one of my fondest memories. We enjoy having everyone here tonight at Calvary. And a lot of you are probably asking, why Calvary Church? Why here? Well, the answer is simple. It all started right here. It all started right here at Calvary Church. Excuse me. And it started with Dr. Betty Robinson of Bidwell Presbyterian Church. She began her nursery here at Calvary, which later became what we know today as Manchester Academic Charter School. Also, this church and this playground also served the Manchester community for over 50 years. And I know I played in that playground a lot of days on the side of this building. So we know that to be true. So at this time, I would like to introduce the pastor of this church, Reverend Beth L. Nelson. Today, Reverend Beth Nelson is the... Today, Reverend Beth Nelson is the pastor and outstanding church leader who came to us from Oberton College in Westerville, Ohio, and she attended Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. Beth was appointed to Salem United Methodist Church in Wexford until she retired in June of 2020. After 43 years of service, since retirement, Beth has been working part-time at the United Methodist Church Union. And in July of 2023, Beth came out of retirement to become the pastor of Calvary United Methodist Church. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Beth Nelson.
Thanks, friends. It is indeed a joy for me to welcome each of you here to Calvary. I'm somewhat of a new kid on the block, as you heard, but my attendance here for many years, even in retirement, I found a good home on the north side. Recently, in November, I actually moved on to Beach Avenue, so I'm an official north sider right now, and I can honestly say there's no greater joy than living on the north side of Pittsburgh, and I'm happy to share that with all of you. This is an historic church, built in 1894, 95, and 96. It is an incredible place of beauty, but it's also, I hope, a place of warmth and welcome. For years, we have stood on the north side. I hope that we continue to be that beacon of hope and that beacon of love. I invite you to join me in a word of prayer. Great and gracious God, as we gather as your people from the north side of Pittsburgh, we give you thanks and praise. For your hand has been with us, guiding us, directing us, challenging us, and loving us. We give you thanks for the roots that we have here in this neighborhood, for all the richness that is all around us, for the beauty of this part of the city, for the joy of neighbors who really care for one another. We give you thanks and praise for this special evening, that we might gather together to remember, and in our remembering, look forward to a future that is bright and full of your direction, your love, and your challenges. Enable us as your people to stand strong, to be the neighbor that you call us to be the hands, to be the heart, to be your ambassadors here, not only in this part of the world, but throughout the world, wherever we may find ourselves. So be with us in this night of celebration. May our conversations be pleasing in your sight, and may our joy and our love for you shine through. We ask all of this in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen. Amen. Again, welcome.
Okay, so next, we would like to welcome to the podium one of Manchester's favorite sons, Judge Williams. The Honorable Judge Joseph K. Williams is a Pittsburgh, Manchester native who attended Pittsburgh Public Schools. After completing the 10th grade, now when I read this last night, I was like, I knew it, right? After attending the 10th grade, he won a scholarship that allowed him to attend Yale University during his junior and senior years. And I was like, I knew it. When I was young, walking around, I would see Bubby, I'd be like, that dude is smart. He just looks smart, right? And when I read this last night, I was like, I knew it. He earned his undergrad degree at Carnegie Mellon University, a master's at the University of Pittsburgh in 1985, and he graduated from Duquesne University School of Law. Last year, Manchester residents and Manchester Connection awarded him for his outstanding community services and achievements. While we could probably list in detail all of his accomplishments, all of his accolades and awards, around here, we fondly know him as Bubby or Judge Joe. He is a Manchester native and does us proud. So I would please join me in welcoming the Honorable Joseph K. Williams III to present on Standing on the Shoulders of Giants.
Good evening, and thank you. I'm so happy. It's sort of emotional to come back and see so many people who I look at, and I have so many flashbacks of not only you, but I see some of you, and I think about your parents. I think about your grandparents. Stanley was a paper boy, and my brother had the route before him. And I was like a paper boy down here, and we'd go to Sarah Gambalier's and we tuck our papers, and when I look around, it just gives me flashbacks to what Manchester was when I was a boy. But I'm going to change what I wanted to talk about to try to work through this, given the audience I have. And it's such a, to me, tribal or community cohesive collection of people. I'm just going to talk about some things differently. We're here this evening to speak the names of our giants. You may ask yourself, what are giants? Well, giants are people who've evolved character, intellect, compassion, and commitments much greater than others. Giants are the people who often believed in us before we believed in ourselves. Some giants you see are filthy rich. Their names are on buildings, and those giants try to maintain a social order that has not provided justice for people who look like us. But then there are other giants that we're going to talk about this evening. And the people who we're going to talk about this evening are people who believed in struggle and sacrifice, people who gave of themselves, people who were altruistic and found pleasure in the successes of others. As long as we continue to speak their name, they'll be alive and they'll be here with us. So I'm going to speak names this evening. I want you all to speak names when I speak them. And I want you to understand and appreciate that they're here as long as we speak their names. I grew up on an alleyway, as most Black people who lived in Manchester did. We lived on Decatur Street, we lived on Warlow, we lived on Stedman, we lived on alleyways, and the majority of the population when I was little lived on big streets. I mean, there were a few people who had success and they got houses on big streets, but when I was a kid and I grew up in Manchester, most of my friends lived in alleyways, and there was no alleyway that drew more kids than Decatur Street. And Decatur Street was where I lived, and my identity is Decatur Street. As I've moved through so many chapters of my life, the person who's underneath of all those degrees and that Jerome talked about is a little boy from Decatur Street. And that boy was shaped by giants. The first giants I think about have to be my family. My biggest two giants, of course, are my parents, who instilled in me a sense of work ethic. They instilled in me a sense of always giving people as much dignity as they will allow you to give them. It's a sense of giving people respect, trying not to be judgmental before people force you to be judgmental. And my grandfathers, both of them, were pivotal people in my life. They were giants who made sacrifices and lifted me up, continually gave me the vantage that giants give all of us. They allow us to stand on their shoulders and see visions and pathways and opportunities that we would not have if we were just moving the way things ordinarily move. So that's why this evening when we talk about giants, we're talking about people who allowed us vision, people who through their struggle, their knocks, their degradations, were able to find some way to lift us up. Some giants, that's their life. They find joy in giving people like them an opportunity to create justice, an opportunity to enhance the quality of life of other people. That's the humane giant. But unfortunately in this country, the giants that we see or we know or we hear about are people who've been very self-serving and narrow giants who've created a social order that we're still struggling with now. And probably no time in my life has it been more critical than it is right now. It's at a point now where I try not to look at the news. I mean, I try not to confront the political reality that I see by giants. And who's invested in what giant, what their agendas are. So when we're here tonight, those aren't the giants we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about giants that were in Manchester or giants that helped us to find our ways from alleyways to the bigger streets. And it's been a process where in the 50s it was one way, in the 60s we had a mass exodus of people out of Manchester in the 67, 68, 69. Then we had houses. I mean, it was opportunities. But a lot of us didn't seize the opportunity. And when I look at the community now, it's much like it was in the 1950s and 1960s, but that's just a phenomena that's happened. We've had organizations and we've had struggle here, and those are the giants that I want to talk a bit about tonight. People who, and I want everyone to have an opportunity just to say the name of a giant that's been in our lives, okay? Now, on Decatur Street, when I think about Decatur Street, I'm coming down Decatur Street. Years ago, there was Mr. Ward, had a corner store, and after he left, I remember Rookie and Bonnie and Barry and their mom were just there. I mean, they were an anchor. I mean, your mother was a giant for me. I mean, it was, I would go talk with her, and she was from a different community than we were from. She was up the river and like out in Cheswick, out that way. But we'd have warm conversations where she could appreciate things that I wanted to do. It was very aspirational because it was someone that I could talk to. Then it would go down the street, and it was next door to me, I remember as a kid, where the Pamplins lived there, and then next door to them were the Gilmores, and Toad Gilmore was a giant. I mean, literally, figuratively. Toad Gilmore was a giant, but he was a guy who was a baseball coach and who really enjoyed being with kids. And I remember my best friend, Joey Boxing, and we would literally fight to ride in the car with Toad Gilmore. And I remember the Lees. It was a family, a big family of Lees, Ollie Lee and Arbadella and Chickle. And I mean, these were people who made me feel secure. I never felt insecure as a child. People talk about Manchester. I saw people get shot. I saw people get cut. I saw terrible things happen, but I never felt insecure or threatened in Manchester in my life. I go down the street, I think about Lawyer and Kathleen and Tracy and Dooney and Antoinette, and I go down a little further, and it's down on the other side of the street. I think about Miss Anna Mae and a brother and the whole household, June, Jamie, Doll. I mean, this is my reality. This is what I see. This is where I am when I feel most secure, is I'm back on Decatur Street. I come up the street and I just think about the people that were there, the people who looked out for me. No one probably plays a bigger role other than my mother as a female, as Miss Alexander, who was a giant. I mean, she was a lady of such dignity, such hard work. She worked, her husband worked. They were a dual-income family on Franklin Street. They had a house. I mean, I would go to Miss Alexander's house at least once a week, go in the back door and get a piece of sweet potato pie that she just left out, because I loved her, she loved me, I loved her family. My mom would borrow, and her mom would borrow, Bev's mom, Larry, $2 to Friday. I mean, a cup of flour, a cup of sugar. But those were the relationships we had when we were trying to make it and we were trying to survive, and we depended on one another as a community. When I come up the street, I think about the Parkers, Pops and Hazel and Lily, and then I think about Mr. and Mrs. Gilmore, Mr. and Mrs. Davis, and Baby Lou and JT and Jean. I mean, Sarah Ruth. This is my reality. This is when I shut my eyes, when I dream. These are the people who are in my dream. But the person who I go to next was a gentleman, and he's one of the giants I want to talk about. What happened or how he affected my life was a man named Henry McNeil. He had trucks. He had big dump trucks, and from the time I was 8 years old, probably around 1960, to the time I was 12, he allowed me to work on his dump truck with him, where I would actually ride in the back of the truck. And he had two guys that were older than me, Leslie, who Bev probably remember, who lived down in the corner of Franklin and Fulton Street, and Bobby, his nephew. They would ride in the cab of the truck. And where we would go would be to Squirrel Hill, Shady Side, Swickley. And he wouldn't pick up garbage, he would pick up like paper and boxes from stores. And what was so fascinating is they would bring these boxes and bags and garbage cans, and they would put them up on the back. That's where I stayed, was in the back. But I would pull them to the front and dump them, then give them the the garbage can back, and we would do this to most affluent communities in the county. And I remember when I was around 12, it was around 1964, Leslie left to go to some place I'd never heard of called Vietnam. And Bobby went away, and I got to ride in the cab of the truck with Henry. And that's when we would talk, and Henry would tell me things about his business, or how you conduct a business, how you make money, how you talk to people. And two of the probably most important things he taught me was how to look people in the eye. These were people who were affluent people who owned stores in Shadyside, how you get paid, and how you shake people's hands, how you project confidence and that you want to get paid for the service you were providing. One of the lines he taught me that I still think about today was, have you made any new money? People talk about, yeah, I got some money. He said, I don't want to see any money you had yesterday. I don't want to see any money you got balled up or you got stashed. Do you have any new money? And for the rest of my life, I always thought about, do I have new money? Have I done anything today that's going to allow me to feed myself? I remember being with him sometimes where he was so adamant about making new money that if he didn't make any new money, he wouldn't eat any meat. I mean, it's like, this is how you grind. And these are the things you do if you really want to make it. So I want to say his name, Henry McNeil, and I want you to say it with me. Henry McNeil. All right. During that time, I probably had a sort of narrow view of who was in my community, because everyone who I told you about were Black people who were more than just neighbors, or they were neighbors, but neighbor to me on Decatur Street wasn't like what you think about neighbor. It wasn't just someone who lived in close proximity. It was someone who you trusted and depended on, who you looked out for them, and they looked out for you. We didn't lock doors when I lived on Decatur Street. It was just, someone was always there. I was never in a home alone until I was 16. I grew up in my maternal grandparents' house, my mother and father's parents, and I was never alone. So when I think about how I got to be the way I am, or why I think about things the way that I do, it's because that community, that Decatur Street, those people, how they saw me, how they respected themselves, and the dignity that we felt as a sense of community. The only white people I knew were Mr. Malik at Jack's store, Chuck Schwartz at his corner store on Sedgwick and Franklin, Sarah Gambalier down at Decatur and Fulton, and Mr. LaQuatra on Franklin Street. They were business owners in my neighborhood. I was close to all of them. I was the boy on the street that people would send to the store to get a loaf of bread and a quart of milk, because they could depend on me to come back with the right change and what it was that they wanted. Now, it's easy for me to remember that because that was the line I used when I was running for judge. I said, my name is Joe Williams. I'm the fourth of 6 kids that grew up on an alleyway on Decatur Street. I'm the boy that people would send to the store to get a loaf of bread and a quart of milk, because that resonated with people. They got to see my values. They got to see the way I work. They got to see how other people depended on me and my sense of community. The next person I want to talk about is Morris Taylor. Morris Taylor operated a corner store in Decatur and Sedgwick Street throughout my childhood. He sold milk, bread, hamburgers, French fries, ice cream cones, milkshakes, lunch meats, several flavors of pop. And he had a penny candy section that was glass. It was like several pieces of penny candy that you could buy. He was wise, socially conscious leader in our community, very political. He was blind, but he wasn't handicapped. He took an interest in me and challenged me to understand the inner workings of government. When I was alone with him, he would talk about the Senate, how many senators there were. He would talk about the House of Representatives. This is when I was in 4th or 5th grade. He wanted me to understand government and how things worked. I remember he would challenge me with questions that I didn't know, but I would go to the Carnegie Library up by Allegheny Center, and I would read it just to come back to give him an answer. But he would fix me a hamburger or a milkshake just to talk about it. I remember one time I finally stunned him, though, because we were going through this debate, and I told him about the Electoral College and said, it doesn't make any difference who gets the most votes in the country. It has to go to the Electoral College. He thought that was preposterous. He didn't believe me. I mean, he was really kind of condescending with me, but he went and talked to his buddy, John Cundiff, who told him that I was right. And he was extremely apologetic, gave me $3 and a hamburger for teaching me, for knowing something. And I didn't get smart with him. I just said, no, that's not, I just would not agree that that's how it was. But I marvel at his attitude about life and not surrendering to disadvantages. Often he'd ask me to confirm a denomination of a dollar bill, which someone had given him. People would come in and they'd get chipped ham or whatever, and they would tell him it was a 10 or a 5. And he wouldn't tell me who it was, but he would put dollars away. And when I would come in, he would say, what is this? And I would tell him, and he would just, he wouldn't tell me who cheated, who did what. He would just like nod his head, but he used me to verify. So I want you all to speak his name, Morris Taylor. When I was around 12 or 13, there was a man who came into the community that was different. This was a man of faith. He came into my life and he was at St. Joseph's Church. I didn't have any real connection with St. Joseph's Church. He was a gifted athlete who attended St. Francis College with our own Calvin Fowler, who probably was the best, if not 2 of the 3 best athletes, basketball players who had come out of Manchester. And his name was Jack O'Malley. He had an opportunity to play for the Detroit Pistons, but he chose the church instead. He was the first man of faith that I came to trust and to follow. I watched his sacrifices and challenges during the 68, 69 struggles, where he was in an odd position where he had to stand with the community if that's what he believed in. And he did. I saw him do things that other people who were allegedly people of faith would not do. I saw him stand with people who were going to be evicted. I saw him provide food and opportunities for kids who had a chance to go to other schools. He used to take Rob Nixon, Murph Powell, Timmy McRae, and me to parishes to talk with teens and other places like all-white neighborhoods, to talk with other teens about race, justice, faith, humanity. This is when there had been a mass exodus out of Manchester of white congregants at St. Joseph's Church. When that happened, that church started growing empty, and he grew closer to the Black community. In the indignities we suffered, he felt. The diocese moved him to other parishes, but he'd return and look for the people he'd come to know intimately. He spoke of my investiture when I became a judge, and I continue to speak his name because he was a moral compass for me and a genuine warrior for peace. Speak his name, Father O'Malley. There was a gentleman who I came to know I knew him before I became a judge, before I became an attorney. But I'd always respected him, and I saw him as a champion and someone, who fought the way that I would like to fight when I became an attorney, and I did. His name was Bird Brown. He was my friend, he was a mentor, he was a model for me as an attorney. Bird attended Shenley High School, and some people thought he was really privileged because his dad, Homer S. Brown, was the first Black judge in Allegheny County. He was the first Black state representative from the district that Bill Robinson and a number of people have had. Abney is the state representative from that district now. But this man was from West Virginia. He came here and really got involved and was a socially conscious man. And Byrd was the only child. Byrd got to go to Yale for undergraduate school and Yale for law school. President George Herbert Walker Bush was his suite mate when he was at Yale. President Bush's father was the senator from Connecticut when he was Byrd's suite mate. Byrd was an excellent attorney and volunteered as an attorney for the NAACP for 29 years. I got to do some cases with him and see the way that he interacted or how he represented this community, and I always had a great deal of respect for him. When I graduated from law school, he engaged me and encouraged me to join him in radio talks and point counterpoints, and there would be people who thought differently than we did and saw our community differently than they did, than we did. Byrd encouraged me to become the lead attorney for the NAACP, which I did for 24 years before becoming a judge. I remember once Byrd telling me, I had an opportunity for an appointment for a pretty lucrative position, but from the day I graduated from law school, I set my office up here in Manchester. I bought Neely's Funeral Home, you may remember, and I restored it, and that became my office next door to my parents' house. And this community provided for me. It sustained me. I had my parents, friends as clients. I had my older brothers and sisters and my younger brothers and sisters, clients as friends. All these neighbors I talked about in Decatur Street, they loved it. They loved coming in and telling me about issues and what they wanted me to do, and they took pride in it. They paid me. But the one thing that happened is that, and Byrd told me this, he said that in each generation, there has to be one of us that stays independent and free, because someone has to be able to speak truth to power. Someone has to be able to not be dependent or in a subservient or compromised position where no one can tell the truth about what's real. When I made the news in my first year as a judge for refusing to take a white boy deal plea, Byrd was dead. But I heard Byrd's voice. I heard Jack O'Malley's voice. I heard Morris Taylor's voice. I heard Henry McNeil's voice telling me you have a duty to every giant who is sacrificed for you to speak truth to power. In closing, all I can say is thank you, Manchester, for sustaining me.